I would have one question for both of you actually, because you have been developing here for us universal patterns. First, Wolfgang, you on educational issues and the impact of education on health and economic development. Charlie, you have been talking about technology, also then about technology and economic dynamics, growth issues. In the morning we have been discussing that it is very important when we go into specific societies how the interfaces, the interlinkages work between education, science and society, and in the field of innovation, research system, business and society. So could you give us both best practice countries where these interfaces are well developed? No? This would be something which could help us to understand beyond the universal relationships between the variables which we have been discussing, what we can learn from specific cases for other countries which are now emerging in the global economy. Wolfgang, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to focus more precisely on the demographic transition and the factors. This demographic transition really is a universal process where the timing is different. And so what we see in terms of different demographic growth rates is just reflecting a different timing of this demographic transition. And there, the key is really how long the perception lag is between the declining death rates and the birth rates, with several decades later falling to this. And then we have a few countries. You asked, for instance, Mauritius had the world's most rapid fertility decline in the early 1960s up to that time, because it was a country assumed to be in a poverty trap, and they just then went for massive investments in female education together with family planning, and the birth rate fell from more than 6 children per woman to less than 3 over 8 years. Since then, there has been one other, even more rapid decline. That is an unlikely candidate. I'm not sure whether anybody would guess. It's the Islamic Republic of Iran, that had more than 7 children in 1984 per woman on average, and is to European level well below 2 now. And again, there it was the universal education of rural women that helped sort of to shorten this perception lag. And so there are some best case studies in there.
Right. Thank you very much, Wolfgang. Charlie.
I think I'll confine myself to the research that we did, so I'm not too familiar with current examples of best practice, but from the historical case studies we looked at, there were certain characteristics of countries which had succeeded. One was, as I mentioned in the Danish case, publicly supported institutions which provided a role in generating but also exchanging and sharing knowledge among diverse actors involved in the innovation system from both supply and demand sides. We found, by comparison, countries which had adopted a more selective, partial approach, for example, strongly trying to push technologies into the market, using technology developers as the main actor, in other words, a sort of silver bullet type approach, were less successful.
Okay. You have been focusing on education, you have been focusing before on technology. ICT is there, so the diffusion of knowledge is much faster than ever before. You have been working so much about institutions and incentives in the global economy to make poverty reduction and growth possible. Where do you see the most important challenges regarding the incentive scheme which drives the global economy to translate all these positive dynamics, education, knowledge, ICT, into what you have been talking about in the morning, focusing on the bottom billion, and what is the big issue here, the great transformation towards sustainability, the incentive scheme. Where do you see the most important challenges there?
Do you want me to respond to your little lecture?
Yes.
I was on a panel this morning, which the question arose, how can we popularize the concept of a green economy, of green business, things of that sort. And I remember back in what we called the energy crisis of the 1970s, I was on a committee of the National Research Council in the United States looking at the question, how are consumers reacting to the high price of oil? And the likely high price of electricity that will go with the increased use of coal, as well as decreased use of oil and so forth. And one of the things we discovered was that, with an important exception, American consumers didn't seem to be responding to the high price of fuel the way it could be expected. And that was probably because what we then called the energy crisis of the 1970s didn't last long enough. There was one exception. Recycling became almost a religious value in the United States. When the county I live in, just outside Washington, D.C., instituted recycling of all kinds of paper, cardboard, plastic, glass, metal, and everything. And in the District of Columbia, just across the line, they gave up the recycling. A good friend of ours asked whether she could bring all of her waste materials and dump them into our recycle bins so that our local collection could take care of her recycles. And I think this became back in the began with something like Earth Day in 1971 or 2 or whenever that was. And I think it's very hard to expect consumers to respond at all rapidly in what you might call the natural response to higher prices. But I did sit beside a man recently at a dinner party who had been responsible for making more green a building that was about as large as the Empire State Building in New York. They had spent 10 years redesigning the whole building inside and out, and they had reduced their electricity consumption by more than 50%, having to do with not only things like insulation, but lighting systems and everything else. And he said they were going to recover the entire investment in less than 6 years. And he said, this can probably be done with almost any building now being built in Shanghai or New York or Warsaw or any such place. And I was astonished because that struck me as being something so unexpected in magnitude that it should be receiving much more attention than it does.
Okay.
And anyway, I don't know whether that's what you were looking for.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you very much. One brief question. The last point is very important for this panel, of course, because you're sitting here with a group of scientists. We have been talking about the interface between science and government in the morning. Now you mentioned the interface between civil society organization and science. So is this interface working well? Do you expect things from us as scientists which would help you to make your work as best and optimal as possible?
Yes and no. I think that the will and the cases, the showcases that we have around the world about the integration of scientists and civil society organizations are there to demonstrate that that's a very fertile marriage in discussing development and options for the future. However, I think that civil society groups also lack the expertise to understand that extraterrestrial language of scientists. Very often we find that within the scientific community, the talk is amongst the converted, and they can understand each other, but there is no capacity very often in our sector of society to digest that information. Right. And to make it useful.
Okay, I think this is a very important and convincing point, probably. So thank you very much for that. We do have the chance now for a last round of questions and comments. If you do have questions from the audience, please bring those in a written form. We do have one question for Tom Schelling from the audience. Simon, would you like to read those?
This is an economic question from Elisabetta Forni from the Polytechnic University of Turin in Italy. Her question is, how do you consider the theory of economic degrowth by Serge Latouche as a response for global sustainability? How do you consider the theory of economic degrowth by Serge Latouche as a response for global sustainability? So I assume it's a theory of economic contraction instead of growth as a response to advance sustainability?
I do have a comment relating to that. The word growth is quite ambiguous. When we talk about economic growth, we can be referring to miniaturization. We really should be talking about economic improvement. The word growth implies either enlarging what we consume or multiplying what we consume. And most of what we see by way of progress is miniaturization. It used to take a room a third this size to hold a computer that I can now have in my jacket pocket. And so that I think that the concept that growth imposes on the terrain of our planet is usually mistaken, because we also refer to growth when we have improvements in medical care. So that I think if degrowth means anything, we've been engaging in degrowth for a long, long time, and very successfully. Not the contraction of economic value, but the reduction in weight, size, and other dimensions of the goods we build and the goods we consume.
Thank you very much, Tom. We do have another question for whom? Charlie. Yeah.
Charlie, this question is from Christian Kirchner from the Autonomous University of Barcelona. Do you think there's a type of technology innovation which may be detrimental to the sustainability challenge? And if yes, how do we deal with that? For example, nuclear energy, the harms it does. Is there a sort of governance of technology? How can we avoid the detrimental consequences of technological innovation?
I'll avoid making any specific comment about nuclear, but yes, one of the points I was trying to illustrate in my talk was that technologies are a double-edged sword. But in the work that we did, we found that innovation efforts, when directed consistently, coherently, and in a manner which was aligned with defined goals or desired outcomes, those innovation efforts could be very successful at bringing new technologies to the market. This is what we've observed historically. So we take that as a lesson for what we should be trying to do with directed innovation efforts currently.
Okay. Thank you very much. We do have another question here, but we are going to read it first, and I would like to bring you both in again, Jolanda and Adil, because you have been arguing in favor of we need more global perspectives, we need much more international cooperation, obviously. You talked about global governance issues. Do you think that we as human beings are capable to develop something like a global we identity which would be necessary for something like a legitimized global international political system or system of global cooperation? What do you think about that? Jolanda, would you like to start? You do have 30 seconds to think about it.
I'm not sure we can think of a global system of cooperation. The world, the reality is that the world is so diverse with so many different interests, with a common goal of looking for a more sustainable pattern of development, but in different ways. So I do think we need to devise other ways of international cooperation. We have seen that out of Rio +20, the role of the UN was sad.
Frustrating.
Yes. Did not meet our expectations. And that gives us a message that we need to go and look for different options. But I'm not sure. I haven't thought about how to. Maybe Adil has.
Adil, what do you say? You have been arguing for a real global perspective here.
Let me end on the hope side. I think it's already happening.
Okay.
I think what a lot of people are disturbed about is a very exciting thing. What happened at Rio Plus 20 was a very exciting thing in the level that the international system started meeting its limits and withered away. The rise of the business has been partly because a lot of it is global. Now there's good and there's bad to it. But Twitter does it. The crowdsourcing of ideas do it. If you think about how the environmental idea itself has taken shape around the world, it's the crowdsourcing of ideas. Now, in some ways, science was and has been for mostly a global enterprise. It doesn't have nationality. And every time we've attempted to put nationality on science, it's been a bad idea. And in some ways, what his technology is doing is it's allowing the globalness to re-emerge. Now, whether the globalness can, in fact, fit into the internationalness, that struggle, I think we will keep seeing more and more within these institutions as they are pushed to become global, and their impulse will be to remain less global and more international.
Okay, thank you very much, Adil. We are moving towards the end. We had several questions from the audience. We started with Wolfgang. I would like to finish with Wolfgang. And I would like to finish with a hypothesis which Tom formulated in the first round this morning, because Tom said that maybe the science we need for the Anthropocene is already there. It's a question of interfaces. This is what Yolanda was reflecting on, the interfaces between the different parts of the whole puzzle of society, research, business, etc., etc. Do you agree on that, Wolfgang? Are the science already right? Very brief.
Yeah. Well, we can always do better on the science. There's no doubt about this, and the effort is immense, and we should continue doing it. But I entirely agree that there is much that we have already learned, that we have understood, and that is just not taken into account. Like, there seems to be agreement here about the importance of female education, basic education. If you look up the OECD statistics about the official development assistance, you find a number of between 2 and 3% only of entire development assistance going to a basic education. So there is a discrepancy between the scientific understanding of the causes of these mechanisms and what the practice in development assistance is.
Okay, thank you very much, Wolfgang, for this perception from your perspective on where we stand in science and research. We need to come to an end now. I think there are several issues where we do converge. We have been talking about the knowledge as probably the most important resource for managing the global transformation. This is obvious. We have been listening to the arguments from several of you that ICT and technologies will help us to do so. We do have some doubts and some questions regarding the institutional dimensions, the norms and value dimensions, global we identities. Do we have already a global perspective, or do we still live regarding our mental maps in the 20th and 19th century, and we would need a civilizational shift towards something new? This was, Adil, actually your suggestion. So there are plenty of issues to discuss further. We do have options for that and opportunities for that for the next sessions. I thank you very much for your contributions. I think it was very exciting, very good presentations, interesting debate. Thanks a lot for that.